The spring of 1876 arrived in London with an unexpected intensity that seemed to promise upheaval. For Lady Arabella Winslow, however, upheaval had always been something that happened to other young women. At 24, Arabella had long accepted her place in the intricate machinery of London society, eternally dutiful, perpetually performing, and far too controlled to indulge dangerous desires. Her father, Viscount Winslow, possessed both title and fortune, enough to command his daughter's presence at every important gathering, but more than enough to make her a pawn in his ambitions. Another season, another exercise in perfect obedience, Arabella murmured to herself, as her lady's maid, Cecily, fastened the last hook on her ivory satin gown. The dress was exquisite. Her father's taste was impeccable when it came to displaying his possessions. But perfection, Arabella had learned, only mattered when it served someone else's purpose. "Now, my lady, that's a melancholy thought," Cecily chided softly, arranging a wayward curl among Arabella's chestnut locks. "You're radiant as starlight, you are." Arabella offered a practiced smile. Cecily's affection was genuine, if naive. Beautiful enough, perhaps, but only when properly presented. Clever enough to charm, but never permitted to challenge. Well-bred enough to ornament any man's arm, but never free enough to choose whose. The Pemberton ball that evening promised to be the usual performance, a crush of bodies in a gilded ballroom, young ladies executing their rehearsed roles like dancers in a music box, and Arabella playing her part with the precision of long practice, smiling at the right moments, speaking the approved words, and burying everything real beneath layers of silk and propriety. She descended the grand staircase of Pemberton House on her father's arm, who squeezed her hand with meaningful pressure. "Perfect comportment tonight, my dear. Lord Ashford's younger son will be in attendance. A match there would be suitable." It was the same calculation he made every season, with increasing specificity. The ballroom blazed with thousands of candles, their light refracting through crystal chandeliers onto polished marble. The air hummed with music, conversation, and the relentless undercurrent of transaction that fueled the marriage market. Arabella's trained eye immediately identified the season's most eligible gentlemen, all positioned strategically among the debutantes, and the mothers circling their targets with predatory focus. "Lady Arabella." She turned to find Lady Caroline Hartwell, one of the few young women who still engaged her in genuine conversation, despite Arabella's reputation as her father's perfect puppet. "Caroline, you look enchanting." "As do you, though your father is watching you like a trained falcon again," Caroline said with sympathetic understanding. "Have you heard? The Ashford brothers are both attending tonight. Quite extraordinary. The Duke almost never graces us with his presence." Arabella's breath caught involuntarily at the mention of Sebastian Ashford, Duke of Ravenscroft. She'd glimpsed him perhaps 4 times in as many years, a commanding, austere figure who seemed to regard society with the barely concealed contempt one might reserve for a tedious obligation. Devastatingly handsome in a sharp, unforgiving way, with dark hair, penetrating dark eyes, and an aura of controlled intensity that made every other man in London seem unfinished by comparison. "I wasn't aware the Duke tolerated such gatherings," Arabella managed, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Oh, he doesn't usually," Caroline leaned closer conspiratorially. "But his brother has apparently decided this is the season to find amusement, and the Duke, well, they say he watches Lord Julian like a man monitoring a lit fuse. Some tension there, I'd wager." Arabella opened her mouth to respond, but the words died unspoken. A ripple of awareness moved through the ballroom like a current beneath water. Conversations faltered mid-sentence, heads turned with practiced subtlety. Even the musicians seemed to play with renewed purpose. The Ashford brothers had arrived. Lord Julian Ashford entered first, and the room seemed to brighten in his presence. Golden-haired and radiant in a striking blue evening coat, he moved through the crowd with the effortless magnetism of someone who had never known rejection. His smile was warm, his manner engaging, and he carried himself with the buoyant confidence of a man for whom life was an endless source of pleasant diversions. But it was the man behind him that commanded Arabella's attention entirely. Sebastian Ashford, Duke of Ravenscroft, wore severe black from head to toe, the stark simplicity somehow more powerful than any amount of ornamentation. Where Julian was warmth and light, Sebastian was shadow and steel. Where Julian's gaze skimmed the assembly with friendly interest, Sebastian's dark eyes cut through the crowd with surgical precision, assessing, dismissing, judging. And then, impossibly, those eyes found Arabella. The moment stretched, suspended. Sebastian's gaze locked on hers with an intensity that felt almost physical, pinning her in place across the expanse of the ballroom. His jaw tightened. Something flickered in those dark eyes, recognition, perhaps, or calculation, or something far more dangerous that Arabella couldn't name, but felt in the pit of her stomach. "Arabella?" Caroline's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you quite well? You've gone pale." "Perfectly well," Arabella lied, steadier than she felt. "The heat, nothing more." But even as she said it, she felt the weight of that dark gaze still upon her, burning through her performance, seeing past every practiced gesture to something real and terrifying beneath. Her father materialized at her elbow, his grip on her arm just shy of painful. "Perfect comportment tonight, my dear. Lord Ashford's younger son will be in attendance. A match there would be suitable." It was the same calculation he made every season, with increasing specificity. The ballroom blazed with thousands of candles, their light refracting through crystal chandeliers onto polished marble. The air hummed with music, conversation, and the relentless undercurrent of transaction that fueled the marriage market. Arabella's trained eye immediately identified the season's most eligible gentlemen, all positioned strategically among the debutantes, and the mothers circling their targets with predatory focus. "Lady Arabella." She turned to find Lady Caroline Hartwell, one of the few young women who still engaged her in genuine conversation, despite Arabella's reputation as her father's perfect puppet. "Caroline, you look enchanting." "As do you, though your father is watching you like a trained falcon again," Caroline said with sympathetic understanding. "Have you heard? The Ashford brothers are both attending tonight. Quite extraordinary. The Duke almost never graces us with his presence." Arabella's breath caught involuntarily at the mention of Sebastian Ashford, Duke of Ravenscroft. She'd glimpsed him perhaps 4 times in as many years, a commanding, austere figure who seemed to regard society with the barely concealed contempt one might reserve for a tedious obligation. Devastatingly handsome in a sharp, unforgiving way, with dark hair, penetrating dark eyes, and an aura of controlled intensity that made every other man in London seem unfinished by comparison. "I wasn't aware the Duke tolerated such gatherings," Arabella managed, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Oh, he doesn't usually," Caroline leaned closer conspiratorially. "But his brother has apparently decided this is the season to find amusement. And the Duke, well, they say he watches Lord Julian like a man monitoring a lit fuse. Some tension there, I'd wager." Arabella opened her mouth to respond, but the words died unspoken. A ripple of awareness moved through the ballroom like a current beneath water. Conversations faltered mid-sentence, heads turned with practiced subtlety. Even the musicians seemed to play with renewed purpose. The Ashford brothers had arrived. Lord Julian Ashford entered first, and the room seemed to brighten in his presence. Golden-haired and radiant in a striking blue evening coat, he moved through the crowd with the effortless magnetism of someone who had never known rejection. His smile was warm, his manner engaging, and he carried himself with the buoyant confidence of a man for whom life was an endless source of pleasant diversions. But it was the man behind him that commanded Arabella's attention entirely. Sebastian Ashford, Duke of Ravenscroft, wore severe black from head to toe, the stark simplicity somehow more powerful than any amount of ornamentation. Where Julian was warmth and light, Sebastian was shadow and steel. Where Julian's gaze skimmed the assembly with friendly interest, Sebastian's dark eyes cut through the crowd with surgical precision, assessing, dismissing, judging. And then, impossibly, those eyes found Arabella. The moment stretched, suspended. Sebastian's gaze locked on hers with an intensity.
Of course, I would be delighted.
The morning after the Pemberton ball arrived with unseasonable warmth and an extravagant bouquet. Arabella sat in the drawing room, her embroidery forgotten in her lap, as Cecily arranged 36 pink roses in crystal vases. The flowers dominated every available surface, their perfume cloying in the confined space. "Lord Julian's card, my lady," Cecily said, handing over the cream-colored note with barely suppressed excitement. The message was brief but charming, an invitation to ride in Hyde Park that afternoon, weather permitting. Arabella's father appeared in the doorway before she could formulate a response, his expression calculating as he surveyed the floral tribute. "Lord Julian Ashford has excellent taste," he observed, stepping into the room. "You'll accept, of course. Wear the green riding habit, it complements your coloring. And Arabella, remember what we discussed. He's precisely the sort of match that would benefit this family." She wanted to argue, to remind him that she was a person rather than a chess piece, but the words died in her throat. Instead, she nodded and retreated to her chambers to prepare. Hyde Park sparkled under the afternoon sun, the fashionable hour bringing out London's elite in a parade of elegant equipages and finely dressed riders. Julian arrived precisely on time, mounted on a magnificent chestnut gelding, his smile bright enough to rival the weather. He helped Arabella onto her mare with easy confidence, his conversation flowing as naturally as the serpentine beside them. "You were the most mysterious creature at the Pemberton ball," he said, guiding his horse alongside hers. "Everyone else performing so desperately for attention, and there you were, watching it all as though observing a particularly fascinating stage production." Arabella laughed despite herself. "I'm hardly mysterious, Lord Julian, perhaps simply less accomplished at performance than my peers." "Call me Julian, please. And I disagree entirely. There's an art to genuine observation that far exceeds the art of display." They rode for nearly an hour, Julian entertaining her with stories of his travels abroad, his plans for future adventures, his observations on London society that were witty without being cruel. Arabella found herself relaxing in his presence, the tension she carried constantly beginning to ease. This was pleasant. This was safe. This was exactly what her father wanted, which should have troubled her more than it did. As they rounded a bend near the Serpentine, Arabella's attention snagged on a black carriage stationed beneath an elm tree, partially concealed by shadow. A figure stood beside it, tall and severe in dark clothing, watching their approach with unmistakable intensity. Sebastian. The Duke made no move to acknowledge them, didn't wave or nod or offer any gesture of recognition. He simply watched, his dark eyes fixed on Arabella with an expression that sent ice down her spine, despite the warmth of the day. His jaw was tight, his posture rigid, and even from this distance she could feel the weight of his disapproval, or was it something else entirely? Julian followed her gaze, and his smile faltered slightly. "Ah, my brother, he does enjoy his brooding surveillance. He raised a hand in greeting, but Sebastian didn't respond. Don't mind him, Lady Arabella. Sebastian has very particular ideas about how everyone should conduct themselves, and he's disappointed when reality fails to match his exacting standards. But Arabella couldn't look away. Sebastian's gaze burned into her, a silent communication she couldn't decipher, but felt in every nerve. It wasn't disapproval in those dark eyes. It was possession, promise, threat. It was a claim she hadn't agreed to and didn't understand. "We should return," she heard herself say. "The hour grows late." Julian agreed readily, but as they turned their horses back toward the park entrance, Arabella felt Sebastian's stare following them, branding her with its intensity, promising consequences she couldn't yet imagine. Chapter 2. Sebastian Ashford arrived at the Winslow residence 3 days later without invitation or announcement. Arabella was in the drawing room with Julian, laughing at one of his stories about a misadventure in Venice, when Hodgins appeared in the doorway wearing an expression of profound confusion. "The Duke of Ravenscroft, my lady," he announced, his tone suggesting this was as expected as a visit from royalty. Sebastian entered before Arabella could formulate a response. His presence immediately dominated the cheerful space. He wore black again, unrelieved except for the stark white of his cravat, and he moved with controlled precision of a predator entering unfamiliar territory. "Brother," Julian said, rising with evident surprise, "have you met Lady Arabella Winslow? Lady Arabella Winslow, my brother, the Duke of Ravenscroft." "We've not been formally introduced," Sebastian said, his voice low and precise, as he executed a bow that was technically correct, but somehow mocking. "Lady Arabella, I'm honored by your visit." "Are you?" Sebastian's dark eyes fixed at her with unsettling intensity. "I wonder. Julian, I trust you're not monopolizing Lady Arabella's entire afternoon. Surely she has other interests beyond your travelogues." Julian laughed easily, seemingly unbothered by his brother's rudeness. "Arabella enjoys hearing about the world beyond London's drawing rooms. Not everyone finds endless society chatter as fascinating as you find it tedious, brother." "I find very little fascinating," Sebastian replied, moving further into the room. He picked up a book from the side table, a volume on architecture Arabella was studying, and examined it with raised eyebrows. "Palladio. Interesting choice. Do you have opinions on neoclassical design, Lady Arabella, or is this merely decorative?" The question was a challenge, and they both knew it. Arabella could offer some polite deflection, agreeing with whatever he said next, playing the role of agreeable ornament, but something in his expression, a hint of genuine curiosity beneath the arrogance, made her answer honestly. "I find Palladio's emphasis on symmetry compelling, but occasionally restrictive. The Villa Rotonda is magnificent, but there's something to be said for Gothic irregularity, for buildings that grow organically rather than being imposed according to mathematical principles." Sebastian's eyebrows raised fractionally. "Interesting. Most young ladies would cite beauty or elegance without understanding the underlying philosophical debate. You've actually studied this." "I read, Your Grace. It's a revolutionary concept, I know, but some of us do engage with ideas beyond fashion and gossip." Julian laughed nervously. "Arabella, my brother doesn't mean—" "I mean exactly what I say," Sebastian interrupted, still watching her with that disconcerting intensity. "It's refreshing, actually. Your conversation has substance, Lady Arabella. Unlike my brother's pointless chatter about Venetian canals and Florentine sunsets, you seem to be capable of genuine thought." The insult hung in the air. Julian's smile cracked finally, hurt flickering across his handsome features. "Sebastian." "I should take my leave," Sebastian said, setting down the book. "Lady Arabella, I hope you'll reserve a dance for me at the Harrington Ball tomorrow evening. I find I'm suddenly interested in furthering our acquaintance." It wasn't a request. Before Arabella could respond, Sebastian was gone, leaving behind a charged silence and the faint scent of sandalwood. Julian recovered his smile quickly. "I apologize for my brother. He's always been like this. convinced that his severity makes him superior to those of us who actually enjoy life. But Arabella Bellowy heard him. Her mind was still replaying the conversation, the way Sebastian had looked at her when she challenged his assumption, the flash of something, approval, interest, hunger in those dark eyes. Her father appeared in the doorway, having obviously been listening. "The Duke seeks your company, Arabella. This is unexpected and potentially quite advantageous." "I'm courting Julian," Arabella said, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Her father's smile was calculating. "Are you, my dear? Because I suspect the wrong brother is calling on you. But then again, perhaps having both Ashford brothers interested creates its own opportunities."
Sebastian doesn't ask permission when he cuts in during Arabella's waltz with Julian. He simply takes what he wants. As they dance, he confronts her with brutal honesty, telling her that Julian collects experiences like shells on a beach, admiring them briefly before moving on. Julian will never ask anything uncomfortable of her, never demand she be real. But Sebastian wants her, has wanted her since he first saw her hiding behind perfect manners while her mind worked through everything being said and unsaid. When Arabella whispers that he frightens her, Sebastian tells her that's good. What he's offering isn't safe or comfortable, it's real and honest. He tells her to continue her pleasant rides with his brother if she wants, but he'll be watching and waiting. For 3 weeks, Sebastian becomes Arabella's shadow. Everywhere she goes with Julian, theaters, museums, garden parties, Sebastian is there, watching silently and unrelentingly. Julian seems oblivious or deliberately blind, continuing his cheerful courtship while his brother follows 10 paces behind. When Arabella finally asks why Sebastian has nothing better to do, Julian explains that his brother has always been obsessive about things he considers his domain, never relinquishing control. Arabella protests that she's not Sebastian's domain, but Julian's response is telling, isn't she? Sebastian seems to think otherwise. Arabella finds herself spending more time thinking about where Sebastian is than what Julian is saying, her carefully structured life beginning to crumble. At the Ashford Estate garden party, Julian drops his bombshell with casual cheerfulness. He's planning an extended tour to Greece and Egypt, leaving in 3 weeks and gone for perhaps a year or longer. When Arabella struggles to understand, thinking they had been building something serious, Julian looks genuinely surprised. He thought they were both just enjoying the season, pleasant companionship, nothing serious. He never intended anything more. The words echo in Arabella's mind as her carefully constructed fantasy crumbles. She'd been a pleasant diversion, nothing more. Arabella flees to the conservatory, her composure finally shattering. Sebastian appears behind her, his voice low and rough. When she begs him not to say he told her so, he commands her to look at him. He pulls her deeper into the shadowed greenery, his fury barely controlled, as he tells her she's been flirting with the wrong brother. Julian doesn't see her, doesn't want her enough to stay, doesn't care enough to fight for her, doesn't see past her pleasant performance to the woman underneath. Sebastian has watched her for 3 weeks, following her like an obsessed fool, torturing himself with the sight of her, smiling at Julian and pretending she was satisfied with empty promises. When Arabella asks what he offers instead, Sebastian's answer is raw and unflinching. He offers obsession, fury, and possession, the complete inability to imagine his future without her. He offers the kind of intensity that frightens her because she spent her whole life being told that passion is dangerous. When Arabella accuses him of offering control, the same cage her father offers with different bars, Sebastian pushes back. Her father wants her decorative and obedient, wants her compliance. Sebastian wants her truth. He wants the woman who argues about architecture and sees through social performances and thinks thoughts she's too careful to speak aloud. He wants every sharp edge she's learned to hide, every opinion she's swallowed, every desire she's convinced herself she doesn't deserve. His words strike something deep within her, cracking the careful armor she's built. Sebastian tells her he knows her better than she knows herself, that she's desperate for escape but terrified of freedom, that she chose Julian because he'd let her keep performing and hiding. He knows that every time he watched her with Julian, she was aware of exactly where he stood, felt his attention like a physical touch, even while pretending he didn't exist. He terrifies her because he sees her, not the pleasant daughter or agreeable companion, but the woman who's angry and trapped and desperate for something more. And acknowledging that he sees her means acknowledging what she actually wants. 1 week after the garden party, Arabella sits at the theater with her family, unable to focus on the play. Julian has departed for Scotland, his absence feeling more like relief than loss. During the interval, she looks up and finds Sebastian standing at the railing of the Duke's box opposite hers, making no attempt to hide his attention. Even across the distance, she feels the impact of his gaze like a physical touch. The moment stretches, suspended, and in that look, Arabella sees everything she's been denying, the recognition she craves, the hunger she's been taught to suppress, the promise of being truly known rather than pleasantly accommodated. She sees her future in two divergent paths, the safe one where she continues performing and lives a life of comfortable suffocation, and the dangerous one where she admits what Sebastian has already seen, that she wants more than safety, wants passion and intensity, and someone who demands her truth rather than her compliance. The choice crystallizes in that single moment of eye contact. She realizes with absolute clarity that she's already made it, perhaps weeks ago at the first ball, when she felt the weight of Sebastian's attention. 2 days later, Arabella stands outside Ravenscroft House alone, having dismissed her maid with vague excuses. She knows this is something she has to do without witnesses or the safety of social protocol. The butler looks startled but lets her in, directing her to the library on the second floor. When she enters, Sebastian looks up from his book, surprise flickering across his features before being replaced by careful control. He asks where her chaperone is, and when Arabella admits she came alone, he notes it's rather scandalous. She agrees. She seems to be embracing scandal today. Sebastian closes and locks the library doors, then asks why she's here. Every prepared speech evaporates under the weight of his penetrating gaze. She tells him simply that he was right about everything, about Julian, about her running, about what she actually wants beneath all the pretense. She chooses him not because Julian left or to escape her father, but because she cannot pretend any more that Sebastian isn't the one she wants, hasn't been the one she wanted from the beginning. When Sebastian notes she's frightened, Arabella admits she's terrified. He sees her, sees past every performance to who she actually is, and that means she can't hide from him, can't pretend to be the pleasant, agreeable woman everyone expects. He demands her truth, and she spent so long burying it that she's not sure she knows what that means anymore. Sebastian moves towards her slowly, his hand cupping her jaw as it had in the conservatory. He warns her that he won't be easy on her, will push her beyond every comfortable boundary, won't be satisfied with parts of her. He'll want all of her, the anger, the desire, the sharp intelligence she's learned to hide. He'll possess her completely. When Arabella asks what she gets in return, Sebastian promises her freedom, the freedom to be exactly who she is without apology, to stop performing and hiding and pretending that pleasant compliance is enough. Behind closed doors with him, she'll be entirely herself, sharp-tongued, passionate and demanding. He'll match her in every way, give her the partnership she's craved, the recognition she's been denied, the fierce devotion she deserves. He promises to see her always, to demand her truth, to never let her disappear behind pleasant masks. Arabella rises on her toes and kisses him. Sebastian's control shatters. He kisses her back with desperate intensity, his hand fisting in her hair, while his other arm pulls her flush against him. The kiss is everything she's been taught to fear, demanding, consuming, utterly scandalous. It's the most honest moment of her life, with no performance and no careful pretense, just raw want and recognition and the fierce understanding that they'd been inevitable from the beginning. When they finally break apart, Sebastian tells her they're getting married quickly, before she has time to remember why she spent weeks running from him. Arabella promises she won't run anymore. He agrees, she's his now, and he's never letting her go. For the first time in her life, Arabella feels no urge to argue or retreat to safety, because she's done running, done hiding, done pretending that anything less than this fierce, demanding love would ever be enough. 2 years later, Arabella stands in Ravenscroft House with their 15-month-old son Thomas, watching preparations for their ball. Sebastian wraps his arms around them both, still possessive as always, having kept every promise he made about demanding her truth and refusing her retreats to pleasant performance. Their marriage is fierce, passionate, occasionally stormy, and entirely honest. She's never been happier. Julian returns from his travels looking older and more thoughtful. Over dinner, he apologizes for his carelessness during their courtship, for treating it as pleasant entertainment without considering what she might have hoped from it. Arabella replies gently that he was honest, perhaps more honest than she was with herself at the time. She wanted escape and to be chosen, but what she needed was something entirely different. Julian observes the easy intimacy between Arabella and Sebastian and concedes defeat, though he suspects there was never actually a competition. Sebastian agrees she was always his, he just had to wait for her to stop running long enough to realize it. Later, as they waltz together at their ball,